those are some awesome majors. And it looks like we have a ton of CS, which is great. A lot of engineering, some business. That's awesome. Great. Thank you guys for sharing that. And then the next question I wanted to ask is what your sort of dream company is. So this one is, what's your dream company type? So when you envision your dream internship, where is that? I put a bunch of options up here. But if you want to expand, like if you have one specific one where you're like, that would be my dream, throw it in the chat. I want to hear it. I might know something about that company in particular that can help. At this point, I've met a lot of people from a lot of different places, so I feel like I have a good grasp on a lot of things. We're seeing a lot of big tech. That's awesome. We're seeing some startups. That's so great. Some research. Google Step. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I have a ton of friends that have done that. It's a great program. Disney. Oh my gosh. Yes. I feel that. Disney's always been one of my favorite companies too. And you want to be an Imagineer? Oh my God. That's so cool. I watched that documentary on Disney Plus about Imagineers and it was amazing. Kind Snacks. Yes. Social responsibility. NASA. Disney. I don't know what Rivian is. That's super cool though. I'll have to ask you, Kate, more about that. These are awesome. These are all great companies that have really great intern programs. So this is really great. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end this poll. So if you haven't voted and you want to throw a vote in, go ahead. Okay, great. Thank you guys for sharing that. When you guys signed up for this, there was a spot for you to ask questions and sign up. And a lot of the questions were just kind of like, I don't even know where to start. Like, this is all really overwhelming. Like, I don't even know if I can do this. And what I wanted to say, just to start this off, is that every single one of you can do this. Going into school, I literally knew none of this information that I'm about to tell you. So the fact that you're already doing this, and so many of you are in high school or like about to go into college, you're getting such a big head start by just showing up here today. So this in itself is huge. And you're already ahead of where I was at that point, which is so great. And I also wanted to say that not getting an internship doesn't mean you're a failure. Just learning how to do this is so huge. And, you know, you're going to learn so much by going through this. And then if it doesn't work out, make some sort of plans, whether that's something at school or at home, and then go for it again. You guys have totally got this. Okay. So this is just an overview of the whole thing. I wanted to start with sort of a zoomed out view of what this looks like. Basically, you start by finding opportunities, and that happens as soon as now. Like, you could start finding stuff today by just looking on the internet and kind of understanding what's out there at these different companies. And you want to do that. The latest you want to start that is around December. And then as you're doing that, you want to be polishing your resume, polishing your LinkedIn, getting that ready to apply. And then your first contact is the first time you interact with that company. So that might be at a career fair. It might be at Grace Hopper. It might be through one of their recruiting events or on LinkedIn. And for big companies, you want to do that pretty quickly because they move really fast and fill up really quick. For small companies, you can sort of wait, and that'll happen a little bit later. And then, of course, after that contact, you want to apply. And if you're applying to a big company, this is like a huge thing. You need to apply as soon as possible because those spots are filled so fast. I mean, all the interview slots for Microsoft, Google, Facebook, all of them are filled literally so quickly. You need to make sure you're applying as soon as you can and you're not waiting to the last minute because you don't want that to be the reason why you can't get an interview. And then for small companies, that kind of depends, but usually it happens a lot later because they just work on different timelines than the big companies. And then, yeah, the interviews for big companies, those usually are no later than December. That's kind of the last time they'll give them out, maybe January. And for small companies, it could happen literally anytime. With my small company, I did it earlier, and I'll go into that later, but some people interview for small companies in like March. So it totally depends on when you contact them. But this is a big picture overview of what it's going to look like. All right, so these are sort of some differences between the different sized companies next to each other. So the biggest thing I want you to see here is the different strategies you're going to use and the type of work you're going to be doing and how that varies based on the size of the company. So at large companies, like your big tech companies that everyone answered in the poll that they want to go work at, So that one, you need to stand out in a really large pool. There are a lot of kids applying to that. So it's really important that you try to stand out. And I'll go into how to do that later. But then with more of a small company, they're looking for people that have a really personal connection to what they do, because they usually only have like a couple intern slots, and really want to make sure that those are people that really fit with the company's mission and their style. So that one's more about a personal connection versus, standing out in a huge resume pool. And then another thing I want to talk about is sort of how the work changes. So when I was at Microsoft, I was a part of a really big program that had like 4,000 interns. So I had no choice in like what team I got put on or what I worked on. I was just assigned a team, and then I showed up and they're like, this is exactly what you're going to do for 12 weeks. And you don't have any say in it, really. But at the small company I'm at now, on my first day, they were like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I get a choice? And they're like, of course you do. Like this, you get to shape this whole experience. So I got to pretty much create my role and create what I worked on at the small company, which was a very different experience. So just knowing that is important when you're kind of weighing what might be a good fit for you. So for finding opportunities, these are 3 things that I recommend. The first one is being really organized with something like a spreadsheet. So this is the spreadsheet that I made when I was a freshman to keep track of everything, because you're going to be applying to probably a bunch of places. It's going to be easy to lose track of the deadlines and kind of your status with them and everything. So I recommend just making a spreadsheet. And so as you're doing your research, you can just keep it all in one place and be super organized. So you can see here, I did like the program name, keeping track of that deadline. I have the link in there so I can easily just find my application with that link. And check it really often to see if there's any updates. So I recommend making something like this to stay organized. The second thing is to reach out to find these opportunities. And these are all people who I've reached out to find opportunities, or my friends have reached out to. So LinkedIn can be really beneficial if you don't have other things on this list, because obviously we all have different journeys and communities. So if you might not have, like, let's say like friends or family in the industry you're interested in, well, you can go on LinkedIn, find people through LinkedIn, and try to reach out to them and learn more about their company or their internship programs. Your friends and your family and your peers, definitely, like I didn't really have that one as much, but I know I have friends who have gotten internships through family or like people they know. So it's always good to try to reach out to those people if you can. My internship I'm currently in, I actually got through a professor at school. So he was doing research in an area I was interested in. So I went and talked to him to get to know him, and he recommended I look at this company, and then he set up my interview for me at this small company that I didn't even know existed. But then once I did, I was like, this is a perfect fit for me, because I found him through my interests in accessibility, and then he pointed me there. And then of course the internet, I think that one's really good for the big tech companies. Obviously you can literally just search like Google internship program and find a ton of information about like STEP. So that's a really good resource. And then any career resources that your college might have. Most colleges have some sort of database or resources you can use to go through your school. So make sure to definitely try that. And then with all of this, you want to make sure you're being really professional and thoughtful about how you reach out. So I put this list here of my do's and don'ts for reaching out to people. And I think these are really important to learn, because it's going to get you a lot farther than if you're not doing these things. It's really hard to get responses from people when you don't know them. Like if you're just sending a cold email to a professor or to someone on LinkedIn. But I've found that if you follow these rules, people are a lot more likely to respond to you if you're being really respectful and putting in your research, putting in the time to craft a really good message versus something that's not as well prepared. I'm sure you guys will have access to these slides after this, so you'll have the ability to kind of reference this later. So I won't spend too much time going through this list, but these are kind of my list of do's and don'ts. When you're doing your research on these opportunities, the 3 things that I think you should look at is what you do in the internship, because that varies a lot. So like at Microsoft in the Explore program, you're working on an actual Microsoft product, versus at Facebook University, you're working on like a standalone kind of project that has nothing to do with the company. It's kind of like its own little project and like class that you're taking. So those are super different experiences. So it's important to look into what you're doing, kind of think about what you're looking for, and kind of weigh the different opportunities. You also want to look at what the company's like, the kind of things that they have in their company culture, and think about how you might fit into that and how you might like one more than the other. And then another, of course, is like current news. Things that are going on with the company might be really interesting and might be really inspiring. That's kind of how I ended up at Microsoft. Was it all started because when they launched their Xbox adaptive controller, I was really inspired by that initiative. And I was inspired by the fact that they were so passionate about helping people with disabilities. And that was something that I connected to. So that's kind of what drew me to really invest in that application. And I pushed really hard for that. And then it ended up working out. So all of those things are good things to research when you're doing that. So 2 pieces of this process is your resume and then oftentimes your LinkedIn. A lot of people will look you up on LinkedIn as they're going through applications just to see kind of what your presence is on there. So it's important that that looks strong. And then your resume is really important because it's pretty much what's going to get you an interview or not most times. You want to make sure your resume is really sharp to make sure you can get an interview, and then of course shine through that. So these are my resume tips. And then later when you guys get these slides, this is a really great YouTube video. It's not even that long, it's like 6 minutes. And my friends, Andrew and Mark, who are these amazing twins who did a bunch of really great internships and now work at Microsoft full-time, they have this YouTube channel where they give tips about tech and tech internships. And so they made this awesome video about resumes. And so I highly recommend checking this out when you're putting together your resume. And yeah, these are really important tips that I would keep in mind. And then with LinkedIn too, it's really important to have that really strong so that when people look you up, it can really elevate your application. So my biggest piece of advice for LinkedIn is to find profiles that you like and emulate them. That's how I started. When freshman year I made an account, I had no frame of reference. So I just looked up this person that I knew and I really liked her account. And so I kind of just like used some of the same styling and stuff that she did. So that's like a totally fine thing to do. And just make sure everything's staying up to date. And if you really want to stand out, feel free to post like articles or content. That's a really great way to get people's attention. And then you can also cold message people by, one thing that I do is I'll go to a company page, I'll search a company, and then you can filter by a school. So you can filter by your college, and then it'll come up with every person who works there who went to your school. And if they're an alumni from your school, they're a lot more likely to respond to you than just anybody. So that's a really good way to find people to cold message. And yeah, I wrote an entire blog post about LinkedIn and how I use LinkedIn and how I made my LinkedIn. And then my friends, the tech twins, also made a really great video about LinkedIn. So those are 2 resources to also check out when you're putting together your LinkedIn. Okay, so this is huge. This is the first time you're going to contact these companies that you want to work at. So there's 3 ways to sort of do this. One is recruiters. You can reach out to them on LinkedIn. You can find their emails on the company website. Those are great things to do. Of course, if you can meet them in person or, at a virtual event through your school, that's ideal. But I totally understand that not every recruiter from every company comes to every college. And so if you don't have that access, it's really great to reach out to them through this and send them an intro email as if you were meeting them in person, sort of with a little elevator pitch and some really meaningful questions about the program. That's a good way to create that first contact, because the recruiters are going to be the ones that are deciding whether or not you get an interview at most companies. And then company events are, sometimes companies will come to schools. This happened at my school, and they'll do like a tech talk or a Q&A panel or something like that during the career fair. And these are great because it's not the career fair. So you're not going to be waiting in this long line to talk to them for 2 minutes. It's sort of a more personal, casual setting where you can have one-on-one conversations with the employees or the recruiters that are there. And so this is what I did for Microsoft, actually. So I've never actually been to the career fair at my school. When career fair is happening, I only go to the company events. So I only go to these smaller events because I know I'm going to get more time and it's going to be more casual. So everyone's going to be more relaxed and it'll be easier to make connections. So that's what I do. I went to the company events, and then I just went up to someone at the Microsoft event and just talked to them about how much I loved the adaptive controller. And we just had this 15-minute conversation, which was way more than I would have gotten at a career fair. And it was so much more personal. And then that person recommended that I get an interview. So I think these events can be really meaningful if you go to them. And so these are definitely great to look out for. And then of course, career fairs. I know they're super overwhelming, but they can be really helpful because, you know, it's putting a face to the resume, which can be really helpful versus just putting in a resume and then someone looking through it and being like, who is this? Like, we never met them. Being able to meet you is a really important thing to make sure your resume goes through. So make sure to have your resumes all ready and printed, have an elevator pitch kind of ready to go to start the conversation, and then have some really, really solid, well-researched questions for the employees or the recruiters or whoever's there. That's a really helpful thing because it'll create a more meaningful conversation for you. And it'll also make them aware that you put so much thought and effort into that company. Okay, so interviews. I know interviews can be really nerve-wracking, but these are sort of my best tips for interviews. At this point, I've done quite a few of them. The number one piece of advice I always give people is to just prepare. You know, there's no such thing as over preparing, I think, to an extent, you know, unless you like pull an all-nighter the night before, which is a horrible idea. But really the best piece of advice is to just prepare, because then you're going to go into it knowing that you did everything you could to do well in that interview. And then from there, it's like, well, I did the best I could. So from there, it's not up to me. You know, I put my best foot forward. So when you're preparing, try to look up past questions that company used. A lot of that is on the internet. If you literally just look up like Google step interview questions, you'll find like a whole list of what they asked, and they reuse a lot of those questions. So those are really good questions to practice from. Also, make sure when you're sort of preparing how you're going to answer personal questions, create like a list. This is what I did for Microsoft. I made like a list of experiences and like stories as kind of like a bank I could pull from when I was answering a question. So like they're always going to ask you like the basic, like what's a time you overcame a challenge? And then in my mind, I was like going through like that list that I made, and I was like, oh, okay, here's one thing that I did that really fits that. And so it's easier to kind of pull those from memory. And then of course, do a ton of practice interviews online. You can do them online. You can do them with friends, with peers, with mentors. Practicing is really important. And then of course, go in knowing the company, knowing what they do, knowing what their goals are, what they're kind of working on. Knowing all of that can kind of help you shape your answers and connect those answers to the company. And then also have really good questions that are really relevant to that company at that time. And so making sure you have like 2 to 4 really good questions ready to pull from at the end of the interview will also really make you stand out. So that's good for research. And then technical questions. These are really common with CS especially. The biggest thing for these two is just to practice. You can practice these online on things like LeetCode. You can practice with friends. That's what I did, was because it's so important just to practice out loud, because it's such a weird thing to go from like coding for a class to coding in front of somebody who's evaluating you on a whiteboard. It's a very different thing. And so practicing coding out loud is going to really help you get ready and get used to speaking your thoughts and speaking through your decisions, because it's not really about getting the question right. Like they're not looking for like the perfect answer. They're looking to learn how you think through technical problems and how you go through a problem solving process. So that piece is so much more important than did I get it right or not. So yeah, practice with that one is huge. And then of course, after the interview, make sure you follow up with the recruiter or the interviewer if you can, and just thank them, and maybe, you know, include some little tidbit, something you took away from your conversation with them that was really meaningful. Be really kind and thankful, and that always goes a really long way. When you're applying, there's sort of 3 pieces of it usually. And so the first one is your resume and your cover letter. And a lot of people will say cover letters are not required. And I agree with that. They are not required. But if you have some sort of personal connection to a company or to a position, like for example, when I applied to Microsoft, I really wanted to work on accessibility. And I was really inspired by the adaptive controller and the way they were committed to that. So I wanted to include that sort of anecdote and personal connection in a cover letter. So that's why I wrote a cover letter for that position. But I did not write a cover letter for every position, because you don't want to do it unless you have a purpose. Like you don't need to just write one and rewrite your entire resume in paragraph form If you do that, the recruiter will be mad because that's more things they have to read that was really unnecessary. So only do it if you have something personal or something you want to elaborate on that's not on your resume. So it's sort of an extra thing, but if you don't have something more to add, don't write one just to write one, because it's not going to go over well with the recruiter, because they're going to not be happy that you just rewrote your resume again. But it's something that can be really powerful if you have a purpose behind it. And then essays. Some of the big tech internships have essays. I know Facebook University does. I think Google Step does as well. I remember when I applied, they did. So make sure with those essays, they're really similar to college essays, where you want to tell a story and show who you are through telling a story. And, have people edit them for you, have people look over them, put some effort into those. Yeah, and then of course, if you made any connections through LinkedIn or like any of the contact events that I talked about, be sure to follow up with them after you apply to tell them that you applied, because at that point you're in the system. And so once you're in their systems, they can pretty much go in and kind of like push your application. Like that happened with me. I like emailed one of the people from Microsoft that I met at one of the events. And I was like, I just want to let you know, I just put in my application. I'm so excited. Thanks again for everything. And then he emailed me back and he's like, yeah, I like went in and kind of like put a note on it about our conversation. So hopefully that helps. Wish you the best of luck. So it can really be super helpful to add that on. So make sure follow up with those people after you apply if you had anyone like that, and thank them. So if you do get any offers, that is so great. Be sure, this is so important, to be organized with your deadlines. So some companies will give you literally 5 days to respond to them, which is crazy and shouldn't be allowed, but they do it. Versus some companies will be like, let us know whenever. So you need to kind of have that all organized. And then if, let's say, you have a deadline for a company, you get an offer, you have a deadline within like a few days, but you have an interview in like a week or two that you also want to do, just let that first company know, hey, can I have 2 more weeks to extend that? So that you don't need to tell them like I'm interviewing with this other company, but like asking for an extension and communicating that will keep everything kind of together for you. And then of course, when you're making a decision, if you have multiple offers, think about company culture, think about what you're going to be doing in the internship, and sort of the overall experience, and weigh that. When I chose to go to Microsoft, I also had an offer from Amazon. And for me, it came down to company culture and sort of the differences between the company culture at those companies. And I really liked Microsoft's company culture, so that's why I went with that one. But of course, if you don't get any offers, that's absolutely okay. You still learned something and got better, so you can make great plans for the summer and go for it again. So I believe that's all the raw information I'm going to throw at you. And so from here, I'm going to take some questions. If you guys have any like personal questions that you want me to answer, I do see. So these were 3 of the most common questions I got in the form you guys all signed up in. So I'm definitely going to answer these 3 questions. So I just got them so many times, I definitely want to answer them. But let me open the chat and see. I see there are some questions here. So I'm going to kind of like go in between the questions in the chat and then the commonly asked questions. Somebody asked, will the slides be sent out? Yes, they will be sent out. I don't know if I'll do that, or I feel like Girl Genius will probably do that, but they will be sent out for sure. Someone said, I use Notion for the spreadsheet. That's a great tip. Yeah, Notion. I use like Google Sheets, Excel, any of those are good. What's the best way to reach out to a certain company? Email or LinkedIn? The best way is if they're coming to your school. I think that makes it a lot easier. If they're coming to like your career fair or like having an event at your school, that's the best. But if you don't have that, I would say LinkedIn probably over email is probably going to be better. But if you message them on LinkedIn or something and they don't respond, then feel free to email them like a few weeks after that. Yep, a bunch of people saying Notion's amazing. Great, I'll have to check that out. How do you recommend we show our personality through LinkedIn/resume? I think the best way to do that is to talk about interests you have that are not in your field of study. I actually get comments on that a lot from people where they're like, because I'm really passionate about musical theater. And so I have a thing on my resume about how I'm involved with musical theater at my school. And I'll be like talking to someone in the tech industry and they'll look at my resume and I have like this tech stuff on it. And then they'll jump to the musical theater and they'll be like, whoa, that's so cool. I love musical theater too. And I'm like, that's so funny that like, that's what's interesting when I have all this like tech stuff. So I think the best way to show your personality is to include stuff that's you just do for fun, whether it's a passion you have or something you've grown up doing, like put that on there and people might connect to that through a shared interest. So that's the best way to do that, I think. Okay, I'm going to jump to one of these commonly asked questions. So with most colleges going virtual, how should we get involved and obtain experiences that we can talk about during interviews? So for this, I think, if you have the opportunity to still get involved at your school virtually, like I know a lot of student orgs are moving to like virtual stuff. If you want to do that, I think that's great. And if you can do it, that's awesome. I still think that's a great thing to get involved at school, even though it's going virtual. But the other thing that I think is huge, especially in STEM, is personal projects. And that can be building your own website, building your own app, doing some sort of experiment on your own, building something at home with, whatever it is, like some sort of personal project that you do can be really huge to showing your passion and your interest in STEM. So, and I get comments about that a lot from recruiters. When I talk to recruiters, they're like, that's one of the things that stands out the most because you're doing it in your free time. It's like nobody made you do that. You chose to do it out of passion and interest. And that speaks a lot instead of, versus like having to do something for a class, like that's different. So I think that's a really great way to obtain experiences is to just take on personal projects. Maybe, do a virtual hackathon. There's so many virtual hackathons going on. Do one, get a couple friends together, do it and make something awesome and then show that off and people will be like, whoa, that's awesome. So just finding those ways to kind of create things in your own time, I think is huge. Someone asked, what are meaningful questions to ask the company? I think meaningful questions are well-researched questions and questions that are really personal to you. So maybe if you care about company culture a lot, ask about something maybe you've read online about their company culture. Like I read online that, you guys do these really cool, like fun Friday luncheons. Like, what's that like? Or like I read online that you guys just launched this new product a month ago. Where do you see that going in 5 years? Or, just things that show that you put time into it or something that's really meaningful for you. Like I identify as a woman in STEM. How does your company work to include and support women at work? Something that has a connection to you, I think is really meaningful. How difficult would you consider the technical CS questions? So those, I think, vary based on like what internship you're going for. So like if you're applying for one of the big tech, like underclassmen internships, like Explore, Step, Facebook U, Amazon has one too. Those questions are going to be a lot easier than if you were applying for like the full software engineering position. So it varies based on what you're applying for. But the best thing to do is you can look up all of those questions online. Like the questions that I got in my Microsoft interview, I had already seen online. So you can go and read up on the questions and get a feel for how hard they are based on what you find online. But yeah, I think it varies on the level. What kinds of things can you learn from professional connections and cold emails? So from those, the best thing to do with cold emails and like LinkedIn connections is what I call informational interviews. And I talk about these a little in that blog post I linked, but they're basically like asking someone for a 15-minute conversation to ask them like 5 quick questions about their company or their job. So it's sort of like a really quick abbreviated interview to just learn about a company, learn about what somebody does, and then make a connection in that process. So the kinds of things you can ask about is company culture, what they do, how they like the company, how they got there, like kind of their path professionally. Those are all really good things to ask. Another one of these common questions, I'll do the second one here. I don't have a lot of experience and I know companies want students with experiences. Should I still apply? I think that not everybody looks for what you would consider like experiences as in like previous internships. Like I didn't have any previous internships when I got my first one. And I know people who have gotten internships like without previous, like you don't necessarily need a previous one to get one. I think they look for experiences that show your passion and that show your a lot of like what makes you you. And so I think you can show that in a lot of ways that's not necessarily like some sort of professional experience. That could be involvement in an organization. It could be a job you've had at home, or like a job you've had, a part-time job at school. It could be a personal project. It could be so many things, and they're just trying to get to know you and understand like your goals and what you're like. And you can definitely show that through a variety of things. Someone said, tips, do you have any tips for a good elevator pitch? Yeah, I think the biggest thing for an elevator pitch is to not be only focused on professionalism. Like in my elevator pitch, I always try to put in like a couple kind of like fun facts about myself. Like I mentioned like the musical theater. And so I try to throw in something that's more fun and not necessarily related to tech to show my personality and to give them something to connect to outside of just, we both do tech. I think that can make you stand out and can start really good conversations. Okay, so someone asked, for computer science, people always say to do personal projects. How do you go about doing this? I would say get inspired by things that you see. This is kind of what I did when I made my website. I saw that a few people that I knew from school had really cool websites, and I was like, that's awesome. I kind of want to learn how to do that. Or maybe you'll see an app that you think is really cool, and you're like, I want to learn how to make an app like this, or like a robot that does this thing. Whatever it is, I think it's really fun to be inspired by things you see around you and to kind of put your own twist on it, or to be inspired by a need you see in the world. Like there's so many people at Code with Classy that have these amazing projects that come out of like something that they've seen in the world that needs help or that needs an answer. And so I think kind of going in that direction is really cool and can be really inspiring. How much CS experience did you have before college? All I had was that I had taken AP Computer Science in high school. And that's literally all I had before going into college. And the biggest thing I think that people don't know about studying computer science in college is that they don't expect you to come in with any experience. So the first class that I took in college, I was ahead because I had come in taking APCS, but most people hadn't. Most of my classmates had come in with zero CS knowledge, and that was the expectation. So they always start you off from like zero. They come in expecting that you know nothing and work from there. So just know that, and know that you're not expected to know anything at all, and that that's totally okay, and that's why you're in college, is to learn. So don't let that intimidate you, because it's totally expected that you don't have any experience. But as far as like applying for like the freshman internships without experience, that also doesn't really matter, because they know that, in your freshman year, you're going to take some classes that will prepare you for it. And they're also more interested in like your passion and your interests versus like how much coding you can do, because they know that by the time you get to the summer, you'll have already had some classes under your belt to get you ready for that. So I wouldn't worry about that for that either. What skills, this is like the common question here, what skills or knowledge did your internship teach you that classes couldn't convey? So the biggest thing is just how the industry really works. Like they don't teach you that at school. They don't teach you, what it's really like to come in to a job from 9 to 5 every day, and like the kind of things you have to do at work, whether it's like communicating with your team or using like industry software or like the processes of a team in industry. So it's more like reality that you learn in an internship, is like how it really works. And I think that helps you a lot figure out what you want to do in your career, because you might learn something at school and think it's really cool, but then if you see how it really works in the industry, that might change your mind on what you want to do, or you might find something you like even more in industry. And then it also, internships also teach you like what kind of company you want to work for. That's been the biggest thing for me is, I did big tech, I've done small tech, and through that I've like figured out what kind of company I want to work for in the future. And that's something that you couldn't really learn at school without going out and trying it for yourself and learning that. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing. How can we find out more about things in the current company culture that companies may not necessarily disclose, such as like discrimination in the workplace? I would just really dig online for like news articles, when things like that do happen, typically it kind of comes out in one way or another in like a news article or something. So I would just kind of look for those kinds of things. And then I also think it's really important to ask people that work there that if you're saying like discrimination, like ask people who identify similarly to you, whether you want to know if it's like racial or gender or whatever it may be, connect with and kind of try to find people at that company that share that with you and ask them, because I think that's going to be really telling. And then of course, yeah, just looking on the internet, you'd be surprised how many things kind of get out. So someone said, I'm very shy, but I also want to take advantage of opportunities while speaking with recruiters. How can I overcome this obstacle? I think the best way to overcome this is to practice. This is something that everyone deals with to some extent. And I've personally dealt with this through just like practicing, because I know that, like, let's say I practice my elevator pitch like 20 times. I know when I'm walking up to that recruiter, like, I know it, I got it, I've done it. And so I can kind of just relax and like go through it like I already have 20 times instead of being really nervous because I don't know what I'm saying. So I think practicing and just preparing with practice questions will kind of get you ready for it. And practicing with friends or with family or with professors will also help, because it's like you're practicing with another person. Where do you start when looking for good tech startups to intern at? That's a really good question. The internet is super great for that. I remember when I was looking for some, I literally just Googled, like, I wanted to go to New York City. So I literally just Googled like New York City tech startups. And I found this article with like 50 of them. And so I literally looked at every single one of them to see what they did. And then I applied to the ones that I thought were interesting. So literally like looking them up or going through like your school. Like at U of M, a lot of like startups in Ann Arbor come to recruit at U of M. So depending on where your school is, there might be startups in that area that recruit really specifically from your school that you can look at. How easy is it to get an internship during your freshman year? It's definitely not super easy, but I think if you have all of this information that I talked about and you sort of go into it knowing all of these things and put your best foot forward, that you definitely have a better chance. Because I think the biggest thing is a lot of freshmen just like don't even know about them and like don't even know that they can actually get an internship. And so knowing all of this information is already a huge thing. Can I still get an internship if I'm going to community college? Absolutely. Different programs have different like requirements as far as like, they might require you to attend like an accredited university, but you can definitely still look at like local companies near you, whether like small companies or companies near where you go to school or where you live. Usually only like the really big companies have those requirements, so you can absolutely find something. Okay, so this is kind of like a double question. So somebody asked, is it beneficial to get an internship as a STEM major outside of STEM? So to do like business or marketing? And then someone said, going off of that, what do you think are the benefits of doubling in CS, but having a career in something else? So that's a really good question. I think okay, so I'll answer the second one first. I think doubling with CS is super, super powerful, because I always tell people that you can make sort of your dream job with CS. So maybe that looks like Pixar, for example, the Disney animation studio. They were literally founded by a group of computer scientists who loved movies and telling stories. And so they put those two things together to make Pixar. There are a lot of companies that do that sort of have some sort of passion and combine that with technology, whether it's healthcare or the arts or video games or music. So I think doubling in CS, like journalism, that's really cool. So like you could go work at like the New York Times, and you could work on like their app at the New York Times, which would be really, really cool. So there's totally ways to combine those two things. And I definitely think it's just something that is interesting and that shows your passion. And then as far as like, is it beneficial to get an internship as a STEM major outside of STEM? I don't know about that, because I think it'd be better to get an internship in your area of study. I think you'll probably first of all, you'll have a better chance of getting it because they'll see that that's your major. So it like obviously already makes you qualified. Also, I think it's definitely better to kind of stay in that lane, at least in college. I think once you're out of college, it's a lot easier to bounce around between areas. But I think if you are a STEM major, you can definitely, I think it'd be better to do something in STEM unless you're totally sure you don't want to do STEM after you graduate. So like I know people who are studying like engineering, but they know they want to be a consultant. And so they're doing consulting internships because they already know that. So that's fine. Like if you know you want to do something different, go for it. But if you want to stay in STEM, I would try to get STEM experiences. Someone said, could doing something like study abroad or research decrease your chances of getting an internship? Not at all. I think that those are experiences that will teach you a lot and help you grow. And I think that in itself is really huge and could be a really big thing for you personally and professionally. So I absolutely don't think that'll decrease your chances. I think it's just one more thing that you can do. Should we stay in touch with people on LinkedIn and cold emails after obtaining the internship? Absolutely. I think it's really good whenever you have professional connections to keep it going. So whether that's like reaching out like every 6 months or whatever, which is like an update, I think that's really cool. Do you know about any high school internships or volunteering services? So there's definitely like the big companies have high school programs, but a lot of them are local. So like I know that Microsoft has a high school internship program, but it's only for people who live in Seattle, like the Seattle area. And I know Apple has like one and Google has one, but I think it's harder in high school. Like I didn't do any in high school, and I think it's harder if you don't live where that company is. And then volunteering services, I volunteered a lot in high school, and I just found those like in my town. Yeah, I would definitely kind of look for ones in your town. But if you're specifically looking for like STEM stuff, like of course there's a ton of really great programs like Code with Clossy, where you can learn, have a really great experience while you're still in high school. So I'd look for some of those like kind of camps or programs to learn. Someone asked, what traits did DQ have that made you want to intern there compared to other small tech companies? For me, it was about what they did. They create accessibility software. So it's software that helps make technology more inclusive for people with disabilities. And that really was meaningful for me and inspired me. And so it was really about the mission and how committed everybody at that company was to that mission that made me want to go there. Do you have any tips for high school students going into tech / any good skills they should have going in? I think, the more you can learn on your own going in, the better. If you want to try and do like a personal project, or you want to start like learning online or taking classes at school, all of those things are really great. You don't have to do any of that before you go to college, but it definitely is great if you want to get a head start and kind of get learning. I think that's great. Someone asked, what's an elevator pitch? An elevator pitch is basically when you walk up, the phrase comes from, let's say you walked into an elevator with somebody and you had like 30 seconds on the elevator to talk to someone before you got off, someone that you just met. What would you say to them to kind of like introduce yourself and wrap yourself up in like a 30-second thing? That's where it comes from. It's basically like when you're meeting someone like a recruiter and you walk up and it's, hi, my name's Allie, 30-second elevator pitch, go. It's kind of how you introduce yourself and how you show who you are, what you're interested in doing, kind of what you've done in the past, and kind of wrapping all that up in 30 seconds so that somebody can get to know you really quickly, especially a recruiter or someone from a company that you want to go work for. So that's what an elevator pitch is. What's the best time to start looking for internships? Like literally right now. As soon as you can, the easier you can get, the sooner you can get organized, the sooner you can apply, which is better. And the sooner you can reach out to people, which is better. So as soon as you can would be the best time to start looking, but definitely don't start later than like the fall, because then at that point it kind of gets too late. It'd be amazing to do one for LinkedIn. Yeah, so I wrote a blog post about LinkedIn actually, and I linked it in these slides, kind of like a total guide to how to make your account, what to put on it, how to post, how to use it for networking. So that's on here if you want to look at it. But it is 8 o'clock, so I'm going to go to this last. Oh, someone asked, where can I read your blog? It's right here. It's this Instagram account is like my main thing, and then I have stuff on Medium as well that's like longer, and that's all linked in my Instagram if you want to read that. But yeah, this is my last slide. I just want to say thank you guys all for coming today and for asking such great questions. This was really fun. If you have any follow-up questions, if anything comes up or you want more clarification on something, this is my email if you want to email me. And that's my Instagram blog as well if you want to follow that or look at that. I talk about a lot of this kind of stuff a lot. And then this is my cat, Larry. I just wanted to include her. So that's Larry.